for coming, and I actually wanted to thank the people who've organised it, because it's been a most interesting day, a long day, a fairly hot day, but a very, very good day. I want to simply say, to go back to Disraeli, that in the aftermath of his death, they set up an organisation under the auspices of Lord Randolph Churchill, and it was called Tory Democracy. Now, whether or not you think that Disraeli was as enthusiastic about democracy as some claim, and I don't think he was, actually, it was Derby who was interested in trying to get democracy. But nonetheless, this Tory democracy was accompanied by a slogan, and that slogan is the one I'm going to advocate now. It is called Trust the People. Yes. That carries with it British values, it carries with it sovereignty, it carries with it our parliamentary tradition and our heritage. And I happen to believe that David Starkey and I've been advocating this as well as he has for some time with others, and it is the idea of a real repeal. It's no good trying to tinker with all the arguments that we've listened to today as if there's some kind of magical tide that will sweep in through tributaries and solve all the problems. We have to tackle it in line with the words sovereignty is democracy. My clause 38 in the Withdrawal Agreements Act, and the word notwithstanding, which I won't go into, but it means getting rid of everything that doesn't actually fit into the new agenda that's going to be needed for this Great Repeal Bill. We have got to go back to some very fundamental truths. We have to go back to some very fundamental values. And as David has said, we have to go and look at our history in order to identify what is right and what is wrong. I don't see a problem with that, but the civil servants will make a huge row over it, but it's happened before. And by the way, as David is a historian and I'm a mere jobbing historian, though I did write a book about John Bright, I do actually recall that there are only really 4 instances in which we have, over the last 400 years, been faced with a similar requirement. In 1660, after Cromwell, they had to get rid of it all. And in fact, they did. By 1662, all the Puritan legislation had been taken off the statute book. In fact, I would also say that probably 1867, which we touched on earlier, was a similar moment because it was essential that people should have the right to vote. And I say it on behalf of John Bright as well, actually giving the right to the working man was essential. They demanded it and they got it. And if I may say with the greatest respect, Dizzy, it was John Bright who did it with the Reform Union, Reform League and all that went with it after the Hyde Park riots. And Disraeli adopted it. That's the point. He was pragmatic about it, even if he wasn't that inclined. Then, believe it or not, you have to jump. Leave aside wars, which are conquest by force, Second World War, First World War. Actually, the next really big revolution after 1660, and I would say possibly the 1867 Reform Act, the next really big revolution, believe it or not, was 1972. That's when we were taken into subjugation by our own volition. And it became the law of the land. So coming out in 2020 was actually the next revolution on the same scale of principle and of value. We actually got back our sovereignty, and we're able now to pass the legislation which, believe me, I'm sure David's listening to this too, could not have been done if we were still in the European Union. By leaving the European Union and reclaiming our sovereignty, and Section 38 says, in a nutshell, that our sovereignty is guaranteed. We couldn't say that while we were still in the European Union legitimately, because although there was a fiction that we were still sovereign, it wasn't true. So sovereignty is democracy. So combine these together with Disraeli and ask a question. You've got the British people who have been subjugated and have been faced with all the myriad problems that people have been discussing this afternoon. There are no easy answers, but there is a solution, and that is to repeal the legislation, be it the Diversity and Equality Act, be it the Immigration Act. That's another bit of sovereignty, by the way, because had Rishi Sunak, forgive me for saying this, accepted my advice to override international law and the European Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention, we would have got it. And right at the end of his career, or at least shortly after it had ended, he did an interview with Nick Robinson on the BBC, and he was asked at the very end, would you do it again on the basis that you tried to deal with illegal migration? And he said, no, I would not. He didn't say so, but in fact he was admitting, forgive me for saying this, that I'd been right, as with the other 80 MPs who voted with me on that illegal migration issue. It is important, and Vladimir is right to draw attention to the illegal migration. So sovereignty is democracy. And I'd simply make this last point, that this conference, and I want to pay tribute to another comment which I heard at the end of it, and that was Sybil and reference to Disraeli's novel, Two Nations. It was the first political book I ever read. I was playing cricket, and my tutor said to me, you've got into Oxford, there's only one thing you need to do now, and that is to educate your mind with a bit of political thought. Read this book. It's by a man called Disraeli, and it is called The Two Nations, Sybil. I read it, and it had an enormous impact on me, and I think probably led me to go into politics eventually. So I'd like to say that I think that Lord Kempsell was right, because there are two nations, and these things can be resolved. It's not a problem when you look at the problem of whether or not there is a solution. If there is a solution, do it. So one of my guiding principles in my 40 years in Parliament was don't talk about it. Yes, do, but don't talk about it and do nothing. Get on with it. Mass ship rebellion. That shook them a bit. And then the referendum campaign that went with it. And then various other things down the road. So yes, I was a rebel, but I also remained a conservative, and I think we can relate those two things even today. But we have got to act on it. There's no point in talking about it. Get on with it. So that's my final thought, which is simply this. Disraeli did act on principle in line with the British people. And I'll say one last thing only. You can trust the British people because with their common sense, so long as we still have a majority, if I can put it that way round, from whatever part of the country you're looking at, and we don't have these grooming gangs and all the rest of it, we can actually deal with these solutions with political will, with sovereignty, with that great principle, trust the people. And thank you very much, Disraeli, for passing on that message down the history of our later generations. Thank you all very much for coming.